Hello and welcome back to another episode of Escaping Kerbin. We are going to pick up where we left off in the last episode, the first part of our Return to the Mun series, where we did an Apollo-style landing with a separate lander can as opposed to the ship that we're going to be taking home. So after we do all of our science, assuming that we make it safely down to the surface and that we are able to leave again, but we will rendezvous with the ship that will take us home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just load this up and see where we're at. So our crew on this vessel, I believe I forgot to mention before, but is Geoffrey, Bilbrey, and Dilcott. Dilcott being our engineer, Geoffrey being our scientist. So our scientist Geoffrey and Bilbrey are going to EVA out of the ship and fly over, or not fly, but RCS pack themselves over to the lander can and hop on in. I tried doing this in third person, but for some reason the reason being is that I got so used to the first person view and the controls of the RCS from the first person view that it's just much easier that way. But here, I try to do it with this, but I just couldn't get the hang of the camera controls. As you see, I'm pointing my head towards the ship instead of my face, so it was a little difficult, but... Alright, so now we've got the two Kerbals loaded. We are going to check everything that we need to do before we separate the crafts. I think about bringing the craft into a lower orbit, but decided not. I decided to keep the circular orbit that we have. And with nothing else left to do, I go ahead and decouple. Then I put Bilbrey, or Dilcott, excuse me, I put Dilcott into a retrograde position. And now I'm going into IVA mode in the lander can, but that was just to turn on the ground proximity warning that will tell us how far we are from the surface in incremental things. I go ahead and plot my maneuver to lower my apoapsis, or what will then become my periapsis. So that way we can go ahead and come around on the moon's north pole. Nice little shot of Kerbin there. Looking glorious with the black racks volumetrics. We also now have Parallax 2.0 installed, so we're going to be in a much more populated Mun than we were the last time we visited. And not only that, but every rock has collision turned on, so we have to be careful where we land. If we try to put one of our landing legs on top of one of those rocks, it will tip us over, and disaster will be imminent. I just wanted to point out, in case you didn't know, if you make a maneuver and press tab, the camera will focus on the maneuver and circle around it. So it's really nice when you're trying to make a maneuver on the other side of a celestial body, but you're trying to really fine tune it, but the camera is just focused on the craft. It's good to know that trick, because then you can just focus on the maneuver and see it a lot clearer. The way to get back to the ship is you press the tilde key. That is the one just above your tab key to the left of the 1 on most keyboards. Just a little tip I learned along the way. Figured I'd share. So I go ahead and open up the communication dishes. We're going to have a real touch and go relationship with those on this mission. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. No real rhyme or reason that I can think of. But I do know that we are going to be putting some satellites around the Mun soon, so that way we can fly some probes here. So now we're just activating our descent burn, and that will bring us down somewhere in these rocky craters. We use up the last of our fuel. Sadly, I don't think we were on a suborbital trajectory by that point, so that piece of space trash is just going to be orbiting until we can handle it in some way or another. So looking around, it's a very rocky biome. It's just the nature of the poles. I don't like that the trajectory is putting me right on the lip of one of the craters, and then I start passing the trajectory, and I realize that there's an error in the flight computer. It's not reading correctly, and it's going to be, we're well past our apoapsis, so it's going to be trying to burn us towards that area, and this is going to use up way too much fuel. So I go ahead and kill the maneuver, and we just do it manually and kind of focus on our trajectory, X or triangle or whatever you want to call it, 3-pointed polygon, and just kind of eyeballing where we're going to land. We're also paying attention to how much horizontal velocity we have, so we're going to try to kill that first, and then we're going to try to hit where we land. But we've got our trajectory. It's not straight up and down. We do have a little bit of sideways momentum, so we're going to have to deal with that. Another great shot of Kerbin in the mud. So we got a couple contracts to look at, and just as we slowly come down, just want to see the idea. I do my science experiments to see if I had anything to do in space low above the poles, but we only have target scanning, so we just, we keep that and we just discard the rest of it. And so now that we're landing, we're going to go ahead and stow away our solar panels and communication dishes, so that way if for some reason it happens we tip over, we're less likely to break them off, which means that we can extend them in the case of if we need to send a rescue mission or something, we don't run out of power. So I'm gently time warping down. As you saw there, I just did just a gentle little time warp, because you don't want to go too far, too fast, otherwise you find it impossible to keep yourself from crashing into the surface. So as I look there, it turns out I've actually already done most of those experiments. I must have forgotten. I had that contract for longer than I thought. I don't know. I only noticed this in post, and so I'm not really sure what happened here. But it looks like all those experiments are done. All we needed to do was the target scan and the EVA report. I think what had happened was I came with a probe last time. I might have forgotten the target scan. I'm gonna have to go back, maybe check out the mission to the Mun from earlier. And if you didn't see it, I recommend checking that out as well. Maybe leave me a comment below, tell me what happened. So now here's my favorite part of this mission real fast, is we came down on a slope, and that was not a good landing spot, so we decided to readjust. But one thing I'm enjoying is that I'm trying to recreate the Apollo mission roughly. I'm not, obviously it's not the same design of lander and ship and all that, but I'm trying to recreate it as best I can. And one of the things about the Apollo 11 landing is as they were coming down, they're delivering their report back to communications, and then suddenly they go silent. They go silent for several seconds before regaining transmission communications. And what happened was they were going to land, and then they realized it was a lot rockier in the place that they were going to go at first, and they needed to do some last-minute course corrections. And what had happened was Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were so focused on the maneuver that they didn't speak at all, not even to each other. They saw what happened and they focused and they got it done, which I think is just absolutely amazing. The idea is that had they not had that forethought, courage, quick reactions, all that stuff, Apollo 11, our very first moon landing, crewed moon landing, could have gone disastrously. But due to the skill of the pilots, it landed perfectly. So that's why I enjoyed that aspect, that instead of just coming straight down with no horizontal velocity, we did it a little bit closer to how the Apollo 11 mission went. So Bilbrey goes ahead and plants a flag, and then he tries to EVA his way back onto the ladder, but again, of course, I don't have very good control in third person. Takes him about a day and a half to climb up this ladder, so I sped up the footage by almost 1,000%, but it took so long to climb up that ladder with the Mun's gravity. So here we are. Now it's time to get Joffji, our brave scientist. Low stupidity, high courage. Gotta love it. But we go ahead and get him out, and we're gonna start by taking a surface sample and an EVA report. Of course, the EVA report is part of the mission. We need it from the south, from any pole, actually. But now comes the hard part. The main part of his job, the reason why he's here, is to collect all the experiments, reset anything he can, and then store all the data on the inside of the ship. But of course, we don't put any ladders. He didn't make it, easy for him at all. So he's just trying to float in space using his RCS pack the best he can to kind of grab everything. And with science in hand, he goes and makes an attempt to climb on the ladder. Takes him a little bit. And once again, a year and a half just to climb up the ladder. It's okay, they got food. And that's it. We did our mission. We just need to recover it home. We also had the mission to transmit data or recover data from the surface of the Mun as well as in space above the Mun. But we're not going to be able to complete any of those contracts or the science contract for the poles until we return home, because we can't seem to transmit it. But interestingly enough, did you notice that our return ship was directly above us? It's pretty interesting, pretty good timing. But sadly, we can't rendezvous with it that close to us. We have to wait until it's slightly behind us, so that way we have time to lift off into the night sky, raise our altitude. So just take a quick little look in EVA, or IVA, because this is the first time that we've had Parallax 2 in this series, as well as KSP POV, because they share the same mod list. It will be in that as well. We just wanted to take a little sneak peek of what it's going to look like when we land on the Mun in that series. So as you see, I'm trying to get this angle. I actually should have made it a little bit closer to us, and it could have been just perfect. But for now, let's try to meet up with the craft. I targeted the craft before we took off, and I used the nodes on the navigation, the nav ball, to tell me the correct direction to go. I tried to do a little EVA report to see if we had anything for in-space low above the poles, but no, we didn't. We're just going to time warp up to our maneuver. And so now it takes a little bit of finagling the maneuvers, so that way we kind of meet up. And we're going to have to take some time. It's probably going to be a bit. It's why we pack so much life support, is because we just don't know how long we're going to be out here, especially if something went wrong and we need to send a rescue mission, then we need to have all the food and water and oxygen, as well as room for all the waste that it creates from there to make it. So going around the planet or the Mun a couple times in orbit won't be a bad thing, especially if it gets us to where we go. And then I time warped a little too fast and missed our rendezvous, and then I started freaking out thinking that we had wasted all our food and we were gonna slowly die in there, but thankfully we still had plenty. So again, just trying to figure out where best to go on this maneuver. I lower my thrust. I limit my throttle to get more fine-tuning on our maneuver. And because our orbit is so close to parts of the Mun, the camera just keeps flipping back and forth. And I go ahead and time warp the many orbits that it takes for us to get into the right position. I point myself in the right direction. And as you saw, just real fast, that green line connected to us, showing that we have connection to the KSC. And we do our tiny little burn, and that circularizes us to be in a similar orbit to the craft, but it still puts us a little too far away for our liking. So I'm trying to plot maneuvers, but eventually I'm like, meh, I can eyeball this, right? So I just point myself at the target, and I start to fire the engine, forgetting of course that I limited the throttle, so I'm barely pushing anything at all. So I decided to give it some more juice, beef it up a little bit. And so now we're firing very far, very fast at the ship. Just crank it all up to full. But our distance, closest separation is not changing at all, and we are now in a suborbital trajectory, and we'll eventually crash into the Mun. And if we had kept burning, all we would have done was change the direction of our orbit, making it even harder to rendezvous. So I just put myself back in orbital mode on the nav ball, and then burn my periapsis back to circularize it. So now we're back in orbit, roughly the same height, but now we're in more of an elliptical orbit. So it gives us a little more room to play around with on the maneuver. Definitely learned that lesson. Don't just point at the target and burn unless you're actually close enough. I mean, I should have known that. To get to the Mun, you don't just point your ship at it and then fire. Unless, of course, you just want to do a speed run. So now we've got a very close encounter up here. So I'm just time warping my way close to it so we can start positioning ourselves closer to the craft. So I set my nav ball to target. I point myself retrograde in relationship to that target so I can slow down my relative velocity. That being my velocity relative to the other craft. And you can see that in my nav ball at the top, the little green icon that shows me my speed. So I just burn a little bit, kill off that speed, and now I'm pointing to the target to try to cover the distance between the two. This is the best way to rendezvous, is to first kill your speed, and then position yourself, point towards the target, and then close the distance from that. And then as you get close, you gotta kill your speed again until you and the target are just basically motionless in space. Wasn't meaning for this to be a little rendezvous tutorial, but that's a very basic view of how to do it. Better people than I have actual tutorials, and I highly recommend checking those out. Whether you're a seasoned pro at KSP or just starting out or somewhere in the middle, tutorials on KSP, always useful. So now we take control of the return ship, and we point our nodes towards it. We're not going to do a standard docking procedure. We're going to do the Matt Loud lazy method, as they call it, and that is you point both docking points at each other and you just push one at the other. And so I did that, but for some reason our gravity got turned around when we flipped the camera and it just sent us flying backwards. We didn't even hit the craft. So now I gotta once again kill my relative velocity, and then I point back to where we're aiming. I do have docking port alignment indicator mod up, so I do put that up just to kind of keep an eye on my directionality, but we don't use it in the actual docking process. However, we're not going to be able to do this when we do the similar mission in KSP POV. We're not going to be able to just point ourselves at the docking point and do it. We're going to have to do it manually. So I'm excited for that, and I hope you are too. But there we go. We successfully docked. We still have our missions incomplete, but we know that we'll have plenty of fuel to get home now. So we go ahead and EVA our pilot over first. Always want to do the pilot first, just in case anything happens to the Kerbal that is on EVA. Hopefully you can get a pilot in first, so that way we can safely bring the craft home. Because I don't believe that the return ship has a probe core on it. I don't think it will have the ability to autopilot itself, so now we get Jofji. He takes a second and grabs all the scientific data out of the lander. That is all the scientific data he can grab. For some reason he can't get the telemetry report, because he would have to go to the probe control, the probe core for that, but the probe core is clipped into stuff, and so it is hidden. So he was not able to grab that, and unfortunately enough, the telemetry report is part of our contract for science from the poles. So that's going to be a little bit of a problem. We go ahead and decouple, separate the lander. Initially, my goal was to land it back down on a different biome and just have it sit on that biome, do a little science, hopefully transmit it, but at this point I'm not very confident that we can transmit it because we weren't able to transmit anything before. But we give it the old college try, we extend the communication dishes, and we do a science experiment in low space above the MUN, which is part of our mission, and I hit transmit, and wouldn't you know it, it sends out a target scan, which as you see in the top right, cleared that contract, and now we just use the communication dishes to transmit all science, and that took the science from the surface of the MUN, the telemetry report, and it sent that out. So simultaneously completing the contract for transmitting data from the surface of the MUN, as well as checking off the telemetry report off the main contract. So I think that's great. So instead of dropping it back down to the MUN and utilizing it later, I decided to leave it in orbit and point its communication dishes both towards Kerbin and active vessel. So now it's going to be a small little unofficial satellite, as well as potentially another lander. I mean, we could You know, in theory, we could just send out another ship like this one that we're looking at, meet up with the lander, refill it a little bit, and take it back down to the surface. I mean, it still has plenty of life support. I think it would be fairly easy. So we are going to leave this here. It is not dead. It's not considered space trash. Oh, look at that. Just flying right on by, saying goodbye to it. That's how we know we're going home. So we burn to escape the sphere of influence, and we time warp to the edge of it. And we look at the beautiful blue ball that we call home. We fly off to our apoapsis. It's the slowest part of our orbit, so it's the easiest to burn retrograde at. You're already going very slow, so it takes nothing to slow down even farther. So then we go ahead and burn our periapsis down to about 75 kilometers. I can't remember where it was exactly, but just a little bit above the Kármán line. And then we set a maneuver node to circularize. It's looking glorious, this new volumetrics mod, volumetrics cloud mod. We are probably going to add a couple more visual mods. I know I want to do something with the plumes, the rocket plumes. I know that Waterfall does that. I might want a different skybox as well, something with a little bit more stars. Just a few. So there we are. We are now in a stable orbit above Kerbin. So now all that's left to do is bring ourselves home, and we're going to try to land as close as possible to the KSC. You know, we're trying to recover all this, all the funds from these parts as much as possible. So we turn on the trajectories mod, and we go ahead and lower our periapsis until it's within the atmosphere, and then we plot our maneuver to take us as close to the KSC as possible. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, I could have gotten closer. You know, if I had gotten a little bit closer, there's a chance we might have been able to parachute our way down and land right back on the launch pad, but we'll try that next time. As you see there, we got some storms brewing on the dark side. It freezes up a little bit, but that's because I just reached the atmosphere. But it was cool that we got to see a little bit of lightning. And we can turn off flight computer. We go ahead and point ourselves normal, and we jettison our lower stage. I like pointing to the side or down or up or whatever, basically anything except for prograde and retrograde, because it puts it on just a slightly different orbit, so I know that I'm not going to crash into it. And once again, we get some severe heating, but the Mach 3 crew cabin plus the 2.5 heat shield makes it, as long as you come in at a nice low angle, it makes it perfect. We go ahead and descend through the clouds gorgeously. Parachutes activate perfectly, and we make a soft touchdown in the water. Everyone is excited, and the boats and planes come out to rescue them, and the world cheers in excitement. There wasn't a lot of science gained from that, but it was a sheer feat of Kerbal willpower to do this mission, get them there and back. So all in all, it's good for our agency. But anyways, that is where I'm going to leave today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward to more Escaping Kerbin and more KSP POV2. And if you like this episode, please consider giving me a like, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.